We continue now at the top of Daf Chavdalet Amud Beis in Meseches Bava Basra. This is Bava Basra Daf 24b. On the previous Amud, the Gemara brought a story where there was jugs of wine that were found among the vines of a Jew, and Rava said they are permitted, and it seemed that Rava was following Karov instead of Rov, and so the Gemara therefore said, it seems that he does not hold like Rabbi Chanina, who says that if we have Rov and Karov, we follow Rov, we follow the majority. And the Gemara says, no, it's different over there in that story, because most of the Shvuchai Yisrael Ninu, most of those who pour wine into these kind of jugs, they actually are Jewish, so you have a Rov here as well. Rashi says, the Shvuchai, Shovchei Yayin Min HaChavis Lenot, those people who pour wine from barrels into these jugs, Limkor La'ovrei Derachim, to sell it to people who are passing by Medina Zos in this particular place. Kidemesai and V'yazal, as the Gemara now goes on to explain. And the Gemara says, Vahani mili baravravi. Now that's specifically if you're talking about larger jugs. Rashi says, baravravi, delekal lemechash leruba dialma. At that point in time, you don't have to worry about the majority of the world. Lemeimar me ovre derachim nafel. You don't have to say, well, maybe it fell from one of these passerbys. No, you don't say that. If it's ravravi, then we assume that it was Jewish. Avol zutre, but let's say they were the smaller kind. Amor me ovre derachim nafel. So then already we would say that it fell from those who are passing by, and we would not say that it's permitted. V'ikor ravravi bahad. But the Gemara says, let's say it's these smaller jugs, but there are larger jugs that are right next to them. So then also, Amor be'avrure havamanchi, then we say that he did it in order to even out the burden that was on the donkey, and again, they were together, and they would be permitted. Rashi says, V'iko ravravi bahadayu afaktanim mutarim. If you have the large jugs together with small jugs, so everything is going to be mutter, even the smaller ones. Because first of all, the people passing by, they don't use the large ones. And rather we assume these are all from the Jews. Now when it comes to the smaller ones, sometimes you have to make it even in terms of putting the burden on the back of the donkey, so you'll have if you have two jugs, one a little bigger than the other, so now everything is leaning one way. You put a little small jug over there, and so that's why, again, if you find them together, once you're already assuming the Ravrave, that they belong, that they're from a Jew, so you assume the smaller one that's right next to it also, it's from the same Jew. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, we have to distance the tree from the city 25 amos, when it comes to a carob tree or sycamore tree, then it should be 50 amos away from the city. Abba Shol says, Kol ilan srak, any barren tree, it should be 50 amos away. Now let's say the city was there first, so Kot says he has to cut down his tree, and he doesn't get any money back for it. But if the tree was there first, it had precedence, so then Kot says then he still cuts down the tree. However, the people from the city, they should pay him the value of that tree. If it's a doubt, we don't know which one was first. Kot says so he cuts down the tree, they don't have to pay any money, he does not get any money. Rashi here says, you have to have the tree 25 amos away from the city. The Gemara says that's in order to beautify the city, because it's nicer for the city if there's this open area right outside the city. So that's why, again, for the first 25 amos outside of the city, you shouldn't have any trees. When it comes to the carob tree or the sycamore tree, they have a lot of branches, so they need to be further away. V'ilan srak, if you have a barren tree, that's not so nice for the city. That's why Abba Shol says all barren trees should be at least 50 amos. V'nosein damim, you have to pay money, means misho yir shalo, whoever owns the city, meaning the city itself, they have to reimburse the person who had to cut down the tree. And the Gemara says, my time, what's the reason? Amar Ula says, like Rashi said, Mishum no yehoir, it's in order to beautify the city. And the Gemara says, V'tepakle, but we should have another reason why you can't have trees, because there's a halacha, Deinos and Sada migrash v'lo migrash Sada. You can't make the fields into open areas and the open areas into fields. Meaning to say there was a very specific structure in terms of the outside of the city. Rashi said, V'tepakle Deinos and migrash Sada, Mishnah hi beparak achron shel Erchen. This is a Mishnah in the last parak of Erchen, migrash elef ami. They used to have a migrash, which was an open area of 1,000 amos. Here we're just talking about 25 amos, 50 amos. The migrash is elef amo, it's 1,000 amos. V'chol elef amo, asr lasos sada. The halacha was that for that full 1,000 amos, you can't have a field there. Because now right now the Gemara thinks lo sada lavan, v'lo sad ilan, doesn't matter if it's a field of grain, and it doesn't matter if it's a field of trees. So now you have 1,000 amos where you can't have any trees. So what's our Mishnah even talking about? That the first 25 amos or 50 amos, you can't have any trees. And the Gemara says, Lo no tzrich, it's necessary Rebbe Lazar. According to Rebbe Lazar, Do Amar Osin Sada Migrash or Migrash Sada, he actually says you could make a field into the open area or the open area into the field. So that's true, but Hacha Misham Noya here. But here, in terms of those first 25 amos, to plant a tree, you want to make the city look nice. So Lo Avdinan, so you don't plant trees too close to the city. And not only that, says the Gemara, L'Rabbanan Nami, according to the Rabbanan also, the Amri Einos and Sada Migrash, Velo Migrash Sada, they say again, you can't make a field into the open area, you can't have the open area be a field. But Hani Milis Roim, that's all talking about when you're planting seeds, when you have fields like fields of wheat, for example. Aval Ilonos, but let's say you have trees, so Avdinan, so there is no such halacha. You actually are allowed to have the open area, have trees. V'hacha, but over here, when you're within the first 25 amos or 50 amos by the carob and sycamore trees, v'hacha over here, Misham Noye Ho'ir, in order to beautify the city, lo, you're not allowed to have trees. But in other words, in terms of the halacha of Sad and Migrash, you would be allowed to have trees. It's just this halacha that you can't have trees too close to the city. And Rashi explains, lo no tzrich, it's necessary, Rebbe Lazar de Polig Hasam, he argues over there. V'yamar b'medevar mamurim bari haLevim, he says this halacha is only by the Levim cities. Aval bari Yisrael v'chulu, but when it comes to the Yisrael cities, it's different. And even according to the Rabbanan, Damri, and Osan Hani Mili Bizroim, even the Rabbanan, you're not allowed to do it by a field that you're planting with seeds. Aval bi'lanos osim, but if you have trees, it's fine. Besoch elefama, even within 1,000 amos, it's fine to have trees. But v'hacha besoch esrim v'chamesh amos. But here, if you're within 25 amos, mishum noye ho'irenos, and in order to beautify the city, you should not have the trees be that close. And the Gemara continues, and we're not tamer the shani bein zroin lilanos. Now, how do we know that we make this distinction between when you're planting seeds or trees? The Tanyas we learned in a brisa, karfef yosur mi beis asayim. Let's say you have an enclosed area; it's a very large area, more than a beis asayim. Shahukaf ladir, and it's surrounded for the purpose of living in it. So nizra rubo hareu kagina. If most of it is planted, then it becomes like a garden, the aser, and it's going to become aser. However, nita ruba, but if you have trees planted over there by the majority, hareu kechatzer, it has the halacha of a chatzer umutter, and it's going to be mutter. Rashi here explains the context. Karfef yosmi beis asayim shukaf ladira sasayim hushir chatzer hamishkan. First of all, sasayim is the same measurement as the courtyard of the mishkan. Unisanu chachamim shir l'chol hekef shalahukaf lader besocho ulehistamish min abayis lesocho kagon karfef shebebika aval hamukaf ladira. The halacha is if you surround an area for living purposes, afilu beis asara kurin metavlin bo. So even if it's a very large area, you're allowed to move things around in that area. Meaning to say, the Chachamim said that in general, if you have a very large enclosed area, you're not allowed to carry. You have to treat it like a Rosh Hashanah. You can't carry something for amos. However, if it was a very large enclosed area that was mukaf ladira, it was mukaf for living quarters, so then already you're allowed to carry on Shabbos. V'kamar hacha yesmi beis asayim shukaf ladira hu mutar l'talta b'kulo. That's what we're saying over here. If it's this very large area, more than a beis asayim, but it was surrounded ladira, then you can carry in the whole thing. But then the question is, nizra rubo, let's say now you took this area and you planted seeds within it, so batlu hazroim shem dira, once you put seeds there, it's no longer called a dira. Batlu hazroim shem dira mimenu, those roim say that it's not a dira anymore. V'ariyu kagina, now it has the status of a garden. Shein hakafa ladira, it's not been surrounded for living quarters. Hoel v'yesr mi beis asayim hu ein metalzlin bo, since it's more than a beis asayim, you can no longer carry there. And Rashi continues, aval nita ruba, but let's say there were trees planted in the majority, beilanus with trees, ein ho'ilanus mevatlin toras dirasa mimenu, the trees do not nullify the status of being living quarters. Vareu kechatzer shlefnei abatim, it's considered like a courtyard that's in front of the houses. Shekifu ladira, which was surrounded for living quarters, umutter, and it's mutter. And so you see from here that we do make such a distinction between a field that is planted with seeds, let's say a field of grain, and a field that has trees. We do make that distinction over here in the context of Hilchas Shabbos, and we make that same exact distinction when it comes to planting these trees near the city. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, V'moyer kadma, if the city came first before the tree, so then kotzet, so then the owner of the tree has to cut down the tree. V'eino nos indam, he doesn't have to give any money, meaning to say the owner of the tree that he just had to cut down, that owner is not going to be reimbursed. And the Gemara says, Ma'ishna gabe bor, what's the difference that by a pit, over there you have a similar halacha, let's say the pit was there first, so then the person who has the tree has to cut down the tree. The katani kotzets v'nosen damim, but there it says that if the pit was there first, so then he cuts down the tree, but still, he does get reimbursed for his tree. Why is that different than over here by the case of the city? U'ma'ishna hacha the katani kotzets v'eino nosen damim, why is it different over here, where it says he cuts down the tree, but he doesn't get any money? And the Gemara answers, Amar of Rav Kahana says, Kidra de Beishutfi, if you have a pot that is owned by partners, lo chamima velo krira, it can't be kept warm and it's not kept cold, meaning each partner relies on the other and nothing gets done. And that's the same idea over here when you have a whole city that owes the money to this person who owned the tree and had to cut down the tree. So who exactly are you going to collect from? You have all these different people in the city. Every person in the city is going to say, go to the other resident of the city. But the Gemara says, Umay Koshi, but what kind of question was this in the first place that you have to give such an answer, that it's hard to collect the money? You can give a much simpler answer. Dil Mashani Hazeka de Rav, Hazeka de Yachid. Maybe it's different when you have damage being done to a public. That's in the case of the city. So maybe by a city where the tree is causing damage to the entire city, so there they don't have to pay. But when there's damage that's being done just to one individual, just to the owner of this bore, so in that case he does have to pay. That damage is not as strong when it's just being done to a private individual, and so therefore he gets paid when he cuts down his tree. And so the Gemara says, rather you're right. That's the real answer. The real answer of the difference between the city and the bore is that by the city it's a public, therefore they don't have to pay when the tree is cut down if they were there first. But by the bore it's just a yachid, an individual, and therefore he does have to pay if he was there first once the tree is cut down. But rather, Rav Kahana Sefer Itmar. But if Rav Kahana was saying anything about Kidra de Beishutfi, it was going on the latter case, the end case of the Mishnah. The end case of the Mishnah was in Ma'ilan Kadam Kotzitz Venos and Damim. It said at the end of the Mishnah, if the tree was there first, so he still has to cut it down, even though he was there first, but he will get money as a reimbursement for his tree. And again, that's by the case of the city. And so the Gemara says, V'lei malahu havuli bereisha dami v'hadrekutz. But still, it's a question. Why can't he say to them, first I want the money, and then I'll cut down the tree? Why does he have to cut down the tree first, and only then he can get the money? And it was on that Rav Kahana said, Amar Rav Kahana said, Kidr de Beishutfi, when you have a pot that's owned by partners, lo chamima v'lo krira, it's not kept hot and it's not kept cold. And meaning to say, if you're going to wait to collect the money, so again, to collect money from a large amount of people, from the residents of the city, every single resident is going to say, go to somebody else, it's going to take a long time. That's why over here, first he cuts down the tree, and then you have to go collect the money, then you give him the money. And the Gemara continues at the two dots, Safik Zekadim, Safik Zekadim, Kod says Veino Nosin Dam. Let's say there's a doubt which one was first. So then it said that he has to cut down his tree and he doesn't get any money. And the Gemara says, Ma'ishna mi bor. Well, what's the difference by the case later with the tree and the pit? The Amrit lo yikotz. There we say if it's a Safik who came first, we say he doesn't even have to cut down the tree at all. Here we're saying if it's a Safik, he cuts down the tree, but he doesn't get money. And the Gemara explains, Hasam over there, Devadai lav lemekatzkai over there, it's not for sure going to be cut down, meaning you don't have a situation where it's always going to be cut. If the person who owned the tree was there first, he actually doesn't have to cut it. So now you have a situation of a Safik, so Sveikonami, lo armin lekot. So when it's a doubt, we don't know if he was there first, you don't cut. But over here, when you're talking about a tree and a city, here it gets cut down either way. It doesn't matter which one was first. Devadai lemekatzkai, it's certainly going to be cut down. That's not a question. So Sveikonami, armin lekot. So even if it's a doubt, we don't know who was there first, but we know for sure that tree has to be cut down. So we tell him to cut it down. Now in terms of the money, so now he wants to get money, but it's a situation of doubt whether he gets the money. So we say to him, I see Raya, bring a proof that you were here first, Ushkol, and then you could take the money. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Marchikin as Goren Kavua min Oir Chamishamama. One has to distance a permanent threshing floor from the city 50 amos. The idea over here is that when he winnows, the chaff is going to blow into the city and it's going to cause damage. It's also going to dry out the seeds over there. So you have to distance 50 amos. Lo yasa adam Goren Kavua b'soch shalo. Similarly, a person should not set up a permanent threshing floor within his own property. Ela imkein yesh lo chamishamama l'chol ruach, unless he has 50 amos in every direction, again to prevent damage. Umarchik minitiyosav shel chaveru, he has to distance the threshing floor from the plantings of his friend, uminiro, and from his plowed field, bechdei shelo yazik, he has to leave enough distance that it doesn't cause damage. And the Gemara says, Ma'ishna Reishu, Ma'ishna Seifa. What's the difference in the beginning of the Mishnah? It says 50 amos, but then at the end of the Mishnah, it doesn't give an amount, it just says you have to distance enough not to cause damage. And the Gemara says, Amar Abaya says, Seifa asan legoren she'eno kavua. The end of the Mishnah is talking about a threshing floor, but it's not a permanent threshing floor. The Gemara says, Hechi dami goren she'eno kavua. What exactly is a threshing floor that's not permanent? Amar Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina says, Kol she'eno zora barachas. If he doesn't use a pitchfork to do the winnowing, that's considered to be a non-permanent threshing floor. And the Gemara continues with another answer. Rav Ashi says, Matam kamer. The end of the Mishnah is giving the reason for the beginning of the Mishnah. My time of marchik and goren kavua mino Oir. Why is it that we say that the permanent threshing floor has to be distanced from the city, 50 amos, Kadesh lo yazik? It's in order that it doesn't do damage. So at the end of the mission as well, it means 50 amos. And the Gemara continues, Meisvei, we have a question from the following Brisa. Marchikin goren kavum and oir chamishim am. It says you distance the permanent threshing floor from the city 50 amos. Uchashem shemarchikin min oir chamishim am, just like you distance it from the city 50 amos. Kach marchikin midiluav umikshuav. So too you distance it from the gourds and the cucumbers uminitiosav and from his plantings uminiro shel chaver and from his plowed field. Chamishim am kadesh lo yazik. It has to be 50 amos away in order not to do damage. And so the Gemara says, Bishlam according to Rav Ashi, this all makes sense because it's saying 50 amos all the time. That's exactly what Rav Ashi answered. Elali Abaya Kasha, but according to Abaya it's difficult because according to Abaya it's not always 50 amos. It's 50 amos in the beginning of the Mishnah. The end of the Mishnah is talking about Bechdei Shelo Yazik, and the Gemara says Kasha. The Gemara says indeed it is difficult. And the Gemara continues, Bishlama mi mikshuav umideluav the azil avka v'asi belibe umatzile. I understand when you're talking about the cucumbers and the gourds. So now the chaff is going to go and it's going to enter in, it's going to dry it out. We understand the kind of damage that is done. Elaminiro, but we say you have to distance it from the plowed field. Amai, why? What kind of damage are we talking about over there? And the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Abba Bar Zavda. Rabbi Abba Bar Zavda says, V'itema Rabbi Abba Bar Zutri. Some say it's Rabbi Abba Bar Zutra rather that says, Mipnei. The reason is because, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video, on Daf Chaf Hey Amar Aleph.